Welcome to Warblog. Today I'm going to look at Operation Peace Spring. These are all bits of it which I might get around to doing eventually, like after this huge queue of things. I'm getting way behind on things, so apologies for that, but this is new. This is happening now, so this is basically really just an overview, like the whole grand strategy. What we've got here is Ras Al Ain, which I can't actually find, but obviously there's nothing in there. But Ras Al Ain is, so we've got Tel Fenda as well. So we got Ras Al Ain is somewhere over here. I think if you actually look at that, it's there. Those other two sections are sort of there and there, or there and there. So they're sort of one bit there, one bit there, and one bit here. So they're sort of, to some extent, each of them are depictions of one hex, possibly this hex, and this hex. So we've got that same sort of scale issue in that, you know, if you were to play the game at this level, they would accomplish what they want instantly. I'm going to play it just briefly. I don't want to play too much because I'm busy as ever. I put in special forces just because I felt like it. The reason I did that was because I'm pretty sure they probably got some in place somewhere, and I thought it would just give an interesting edge to contemplate that. There's no evidence for it, but they start off with plenty of airstrikes and artillery. What they're sort of, no one really knows what they're trying to do, but I think what they're suggesting is they want to create a 30-kilometer buffer zone along the border like that. Now they already have this sort of border from Jarablus and Manjib down there. However, some people are sort of intonating that they're going to push it a lot further down here, like that. And obviously you have the Iraqis, the Syrians over here, who apparently don't have this part, so they might want to move into there and or move across the Euphrates. Not been much said about that. It's strange that Turkey is playing such a prominent role in Syrian territory, although it's a bit odd. So it's all a bit sort of peculiar, because, you know, Trump has sort of just, to some extent, I think, has left the Kurds high and dry, so to speak. And I'm beginning to sort of wonder what the role of the Americans there was, because the news reports I've read were that they've, you know, Americans have now moved out 200 personnel and they crossed the border here or here. I can't remember where, but the thing is, 200, it's not a fighting force. I think what the Americans were doing, part and parcel in some extent, was obviously providing air power, intelligence, logistics, supplies, things like that. But they were also there so that Turkish forces or their sort of proxies or the Syrian forces couldn't attack them without attacking American forces. But now the American forces have left, they can. So there's no such thing as sort of fighting the Americans. It was just a sort of a tentative thing that they're there. Any assault on the Kurds would have been an assault on the Americans, which they didn't want to push. And I don't really know the deep down politics of it all, but obviously Turkey is, from the reports I've read, is pushing harder than people thought. And obviously there's the constant reports of all the what do you call them? The people leaving towns, the I can't remember what they're called now. The refugees sort of fleeing, and Turkish forces bombing schools and hospitals. So, but I don't think that seems to be deterring the Turks. They seem to be sort of fairly certain that they want to achieve this buffer zone, and you can sort of understand why when you consider what they've done. I can't remember what this was, Operation Euphrates Shield or something, the attack into Jarablus, and their ongoing battles with the PKK, and I think it's sort of that's sort of part and parcel of it, but also that the Turks are sort of what they want to do, and I think I put this in the write-up, is to create a safe zone along this strip for all the Syrian refugees to return to Syria. And to some extent, I think if you sort of think, well, what's a safe zone? Well, they're not really going to say, oh, you can now live in tents in this desert hex here. And the only thing to bear in mind is when you zoom in on a good map, there's lots of built-up areas around here. It's not all desert. This probably isn't actually desert anyway, but I've just used those. It's easy for me to just put it all as one. But so what they're probably going to do is to secure places, and they're all named differently depending on who you listen to. I mean, I can't even find that Arash Rif one that I was looking for, but I'm pretty sure that it's somewhere here, Ras Al Ain. In fact, actually, it might be where it is. I think it's correct on this map. I just couldn't find it on Google Maps. Anyway, that's all something else. So what I'm thinking is that they're going to try and take places like this that have outlying settlements and can essentially support the returning Syrians. I doubt that they'll really have plenty of places to accommodate them, so they'll probably be in tents as well, and then sort of, and I don't really know what they're doing, but, in theory, presumably they're going to try and build houses and homes and probably, concrete towers and flats and things like that they can start putting these people into. I think that's, from my point of view, whenever you talk about war, for me, it always comes down to the destruction of physical property. I feel less sensitive to the sort of the perils of human life because there's always more human life. It sounds callous, but the thing is, the structure and the product and the output of humans are the things that they do and the things that they make, i.e. the property that they leave behind. A lot of these properties, the property I'm in at the moment was formed by the efforts and the endeavours of however many people in 1928. That's a long time ago. That's nearly 100 years ago, and it's still providing a function of a dwelling house today. And once you start destroying those, that effort and time and effort that has served, people for almost 100 years is gone. And so that has a sort of, a value in that sense. And I think that whole sort of rebuilding effort is sort of central to resolving a lot of the issues. I know I've sort of gone off on a sort of tangent there, but I sort of, where are these people going to live, these returning Syrians? I mean, where are they going to live anyway? Without even getting into the hornet's nest of, European overcrowding, they're going to have to be put somewhere. And, places like, maybe not Manjib or Jarablus, but I can't remember what else the place I'm thinking of. I don't see it on this map. It was a place near a big mountain that the Kurds took back from ISIS. I'm pretty sure it's somewhere around. I'm not sure it's Turkish territory, but I can't find it. I mean, Araka, I think that was pretty much destroyed. And these things are going to take ages to repair, and you can't just get people that don't have a home to build them. I mean, you can, and obviously they'd probably be quite keen, but these sorts of things, despite the sort of capital damage that this Turkish advance is going to, inflict on, on the property in these sorts of areas, anyway, you can't really just sort of conjure up and magic all these sorts of facilities, including sort of infrastructure like sewage and water supply and electric supply. I mean, electric supply is less important because, these people are sort of, fairly robust in the sense that, that they can probably, use colour gas and lots of blankets and, work with daylight hours. But things like water, that's sort of more of a public health issue. I mean, obviously, other things are public health issues, but, cholera and typhoid or whatever, these things, waterborne epidemics are, and, you just can't magic up, these infrastructures. And so, creating this sort of safe zone, it's sort of, I don't know, really, what that really means, because you can't just plonk, 1 million Syrian refugees in the desert and expect them to flourish. So there's got to be a sort of a gameplay there. But back onto the real efforts of war and destruction. Essentially, the Turks started off with a lot of bombardments, and that's one of the reasons I sort of don't want to play this game too much in earnest right now. Not that I'm because I'm being sort of sensitive or anything like that. It's not at all. It's because I think this map is really just a silly scale. Because this is for example, if we look at this Tel Fender one, now again it's just a map, and it could be that sort of scale, but it is pretty much the nitty-gritty of what's happening around here, I think. Now the thing is, I can't find this Tel Fender, but that's what it says in South Front, so, and it's even got a map, pretty sure. See South Front, no link, brilliant. Might be a link in this one, because it's exactly the same. So I can't find any of these places. It's got the map. These are all the two things come from. So you've got the first one. There's Tel Fender. And then you've got this one. Now, I didn't even know what to call this one. So I called it Abu El Ayas. So they obviously take that and they're moving into this place. But there's really not a lot that you can do to sort of gauge where these places are. Now, there's Tel Abyad, and there's Tel Abyad. So those two places are sort of there and there. So we might even be able to see Mashrafa, but you can't. Mazraha, maybe that's it. But it's interesting. It's interesting to see a lot of it's all farmland. Quite often not so much confuse myself with that, but it's definitely desert, and that's what I want to do. I want to have sort of desert themed farmland, because it's not European farmland with all sorts of green fields. It's very sort of dry farming, probably reliant on a lot of irrigation. So it's probably, this is, I think, the upper Euphrates here, and so you've probably got a lot of this, irrigating from it, etc., etc. So essentially, we've got this sort of thing happening. So I'm just going to play a little bit of it. But like I say, I don't really want to get into it, because I think the scale is sort of wrong, because we could just punch through all of this. Now, I haven't really been paying attention because I'm sort of busy. So I haven't followed exactly what's been happening. But I gather that they're sort of running away a lot, but they're trying to hold up in strategic towns. And I think I've given them all irregular forces, because I don't think they're going to really try and hold as a sort of a regular force in against the sort of the might of the Turkish army, who have tanks and artillery, and they're probably really prepared for it. So I've put them there as sort of irregulars, and it's interesting really, because it comes back to what it always comes back down to, is when you've got and this I already picked up with the Greek Civil War, when you've got an irregular force, I can't remember what they called them now, but they need a base. So you need a base, you need financial support, and other things. You need supplies, you need medical support. Now the thing is, when you look at this, they've got Araka, which if the Kurds control it, and I'm surprised if they do, but it looks like this map they do, they've got a city. So there's one place. They've got Al-Hasaka. They've got Manjib, and I'm pretty sure they control Manjib. They've got the units in there at the moment. So you can sort of count the cities. There's, well, town, and I can't remember what's what, but you've got a fair few numbers of towns. So you've got Tel Abyad, but these are not sort of major cities. This is actually not a very big geographical zone. So you've got Araka. It's hardly an industrial sort of, hub of northern Syria. I mean, it's probably still a ruin from the previous battle with ISIS. But they will. Firstly, they probably don't have an industrial weapons complex, pushing out Panzer tanks off production lines. So they probably just rely wholly on Toyota pickups with heavy machine guns on the back and whatever sort of indirect area fire they've been gifted by the Americans. I get the feeling that the Americans were supporting them with just about everything other than sort of, heavy equipment, in particular tanks. I don't think they were giving them tanks, just things that they could use, like armoured vehicles, some mechanised infantry with 20mm cannons or 50mm cannons or something like that, mortars and such. But the thing is, once they sort of, they're not really going to be able to do much with that against the Turks. And I doubt that they have, unlike the Sham and all those other sort of rebel units, masses of anti-tank pieces, these sorts of guided missiles and things like that. It'd be interesting to see what they do have and who's supplying them, because I don't think the Americans would have been supplying the Kurds with anything as vicious as, say, maybe the Iranians might have been supplying the Houthis in Yemen, because they really want to give them an edge. But I don't think they've got ballistic missiles and things that can really do things. I think that they weren't giving the Kurds things that were sort of truly offensive, or in that nature. And whilst the fight was against ISIS, who were essentially, really pummeled and were just insurgents with AK-47s and the odd mortar and RPG and whatever they could get their hands on, this is a serious, well, when you say serious, I mean it's Turkey, but it's a serious trained army. I mean that they take it seriously, and it's it's funded by a government, so there's they've got the resources and things like that. So I can't see them actually doing anything. And I think the problem we've got at the moment is the bluster between what the press are saying. Why have these things gone? Why have they? Oh, I think because it's got on map mode. That's strange. Strange how it goes in map mode. But I think what I was trying to get to there is the bluster. I mean, it sort of shocked me really, because it seems sort of quite a natural thing for Turkey to want to do, to create this buffer zone because of the history. I mean, they're constantly invading Iraq. If you look at those operations where they're invading northern Iraq, they seem to do it with alarming regularity, and it doesn't seem to be, a big problem. And when they try to enforce the sort of security zone, in this sense, it seems to be that they're on the precipice of World War III, etc., etc. So, and I mean, you might have thought, and maybe I don't understand the Kurdish situation as well as I should, but you might have thought that the Kurds would just give ground for 30 kilometers and have done with the possibility of all these, all this destruction to the infrastructure. They don't want that, and so it'd be sort of, I don't know, you sort of wonder why there's actually any conflict at all, because the outcome is inevitable, unless of course they really feel strongly about what the Turks are doing, because they could sort of coexist. But I think it's just this sort of this inevitable intermixing of PKK sympathisers with the Kurdish populace in general, that means that there's really little ground, and possibly the Turks are going to be taking a lot of prisoners. I mean, it's a serious thing though, because I read that in the latest reports, sort of the newspaper said 350 terrorists dead. Well, I mean, that means Kurds really, or a mixture of them. There's a lot of people dying in this sort of thing. But so enough of that sort of nonsense. I'll just try and sort of get into it. So in the first instance, I'm going to sort of do the airstrikes, and we're going to focus on the ones that are. So we're going to focus on taking Tel Abyad and Ras Al-Ain, because they're the ones that we sort of think that they're taking. But we're going to both go for this hex, and this hex here. See, it's not even a challenge. It's even probably a waste. But we have to do these airstrikes because we've seen the pictures. Oh, the other thing to say is that, because I started this, and I don't really keep up to speed with all the news because I'm just so busy and it's difficult. But I sort of speed read things here and there, and I picked this up, obviously when it was starting before the ground invasion. And so what I did was I put in all these things, and these are all objectives. So, for example, these were all places that were blown up. So let's look at Kobani, which we've heard before as a name. Now, what we want to do is, it's so complicated. I'm going to do this. This means aerial bombardment. So we take our plane and we're going to bombard Kobani. So Kobani's got air defense, but we don't care. And we did 2 damage. So if we go back to Kobani, what we'll see now is that Kobani has been reduced to 2. Now, I'm always a bit vague on how this thing works, so let's do it. Let's do it again. I should really move that up so it's easier to do. 5 damage. Okay, it's not going to go below 5, so we've done the damage there. It should say destroyed. Might have to figure all that out, to be quite honest. But what we're doing here is we're attacking these targets. Zero damage. Let's do it again. 4 damage. So that is now down to 0. That's down to 0. Let's attack Tel Abyad. So this is different to attacking the units, and this is what they were doing. They're just attacking the places. And I thought in the first instance, the way this game should work is that you should be taking out. Yeah, that's all a bit of a mess, isn't it? 1 damage. So let's use our artillery in there as well. Doesn't seem to be doing anything. That doesn't make sense. Okay, so that seems to be at -1. So we did 4 damage on it. Essentially, there should be a conclusion to that. So we've been attacking these targets, and we've used up all our resources, although all our resources from here. So we've got some more over here. So let's use those as well. Let's go for this Canik area. That's an easy one. And what did that do? Didn't seem to hit. The artillery doesn't seem to be hitting. Either that or it's just not very good at doing it. Yeah, okay. Now that, interestingly enough, has been destroyed. So the artillery was hitting, but we weren't really picking it up. Now I think that's basically got something to do with the settings that I give. So that's what we should be trying to do. And when I say destroyed, it means we've achieved whatever objective we want in there. It doesn't mean we destroyed the whole place because we only did 2 rounds of artillery on it. But it could be we're trying to destroy something in Canik, and we've achieved that there. And similarly, we can use our so we might want to take out this here, which was a target. So we'll try that. So it didn't seem to hit. We pretty much spent all our artillery. I thought we had 4 lots of artillery, and there's 2 lots in there. 1, 2, 3, 4. So now we can go in for the movement. Now, we said we're just going to go for this hex here. So we really don't need a lot. Yep, it was an 8 to 1, so we've moved in and taken that hex. I'm going to protect the artillery. Now, I think in this game, I think it's fair to say that the Kurds are not going to go into Turkey because that would just be asking for trouble. I think they're a little cowed. I mean, it would be. But they have been. There was one report of them firing rockets into one of these Turkish towns. I got a feeling that they were being a bit muted about that, sort of, to say, well, we'll do it, but it's hardly sort of like an equal exchange of firepower. I don't think they really want to be annoying the Turks that much. So that's what I'm saying. I would have thought they'd just be voluntarily retreating, but maybe putting up a token resistance, but we yet to see, really. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to assume that the Turks are not going to I'm going to assume that the Kurds are not going to go into that territory and that the artillery pieces are safe. What I really wanted to do. So let's just take this out. Oh, look at that! So we can do a massive combined arms here on this unit. Not 4 to 1 and get an exchange. Now that was because he's won and he was defending, wasn't he? It has to be. He was defending in Tel Abyad, which, because he's an irregular, put him up to 4, or and probably doubled him because he was an irregular, and it's doubled him because it's a town. I can't remember how it all works, but they get benefits for being in towns, and that was what we saw there. So we've been fighting them and we haven't managed to take them out there. We're going to take this hex. Well, yeah, so we've taken that hex and that hex. We're trying to take this hex here next, I think. I mean, how can they lose this? DE. Now, they can't get in. Oh, they can. Got enough movement to do that. So that's it. That's it for all the initial assaults based on the information that we've got. And like I say, it's sort of, it doesn't seem like a lot, because you sort of think, oh gosh, I could just then storm through this and I could easily take that. I mean, we sort of fought into here. We gained this hex. We didn't gain this hex, which is really what we should have been trying to do. We've been cheated a bit and tried to go for a Tel Abyad and failed. So but the battle's raging here. The battle's raging here with interdiction all along the line. There, and there. So, I think that's quite a sort of a good introduction. Now, the only thing I would do want to cover, because I don't want to sort of go on too long with this video, obviously you could play this properly as a game. I've deliberately not put in too many Turkish units because of the fact that I think it's safe to assume that the Kurds are not going to invade Turkey, and so Şanlıurfa is not at risk. And so you can play a game like that. This is the incursion force with a particular issue, particular sort of objective, but they're quite tough. But I have put these units in. I'm sort of thinking, well, what would you do with this? What would you do? And well, I don't know really. We could take out this town here, but they'd be out of supply really. So. And the only other thing to say is that obviously there's quite a big force in there, and they've got mechanised units. And we've got these units here. Let's just cover these. These are the Syrian National Army, but they're sort of what used to be the Free Syrian Army, or the green ones. And that took me quite a long time to actually sort out, really, because there's about 50 of them. There's 5 rows, there's 6 rows, there's 30 of them. There's 30 of these things. I've only done 4. I did the interesting ones. Well, not all the interesting ones. These are the army of the elite. These are the Sultan Suleiman Fatih Brigade. This is the 5th Regiment. There's quite a few like that. Sort of 5th Regiment. That's an interesting name for a bunch of, these sort of Middle Eastern Muslim type warriors, because usually they're called Sultan something or other. They're given the name Sultan this or Sultan that, and this one is the Men of War Brigade. That's the one I would join. I think that sounds like, I think these ones are sort of the most sort of, the army of elite. And I'm just wondering, how elite they were and whether they sort of were doing special training, or it seems to me that giving yourself a name like that would sort of, have connotations. They'd probably be expecting to do special things, like the commandos, special forces. But the army of the Men of War Brigade, I don't know. Anyway, so I don't want to sort of get too excited about the names. There's 30 of them, but they were basically a breakup of they're basically the Syrian National Army, as they've been described and noted and named, is an umbrella term for 30 different factions, some of which we've heard before. And that's all under this South Front thing. Let's just have a look, because it is quite interesting. And I think there's something that, appeals to me. It's sort of like picking up on, all this sort of, these strange things. I see things like that and I think, oh my God, there's another game that I've got to make. I get quite excited about that, but only when there's a map. That looks interesting. I mean, what the hell is that? Turkish forces capture 18 villages, and I don't have time for any of this. They should just do this thing slower. Anyway, this is quite alarming. Booby-trapped car exploded in Qamishi. I think like 20 people died or something. It's all terrible stuff, but SDF shelling kills civilians, injures journalists in southern Turkey. Yeah, because there's been a massive bomb in Turkey killing 30 policemen or something like that. These are what we just did. Oh no, this is Iblid. So it's all happening, and it's all history in the making. Til Helef. So that's the line. You can sort of see what they're trying to achieve along there. Turk Stream. To the US to vote on sanctions on Turkey's leadership. That's what I had initially. So these are the areas that you have airstrikes on, because these are sort of, oh, I don't know what it is. It says something. These are the maps that I was using, and there's the list of this infographic. Turkish Syrian National Army. I was going to put all the logos in there, but it's just, it's just be forever. But it's quite interesting. So you've got the Sultan Murat Brigade, the Sultan Mehmet Fatih Brigade, the Sultan Suleiman Fatih Brigade, Samarkand Brigade, the Al-Muntasir Billah Brigade. See, some of them I sort of recognise, but I'm thinking, well, do I really? The Sham Legion, I'm sure we've heard that one before. The Lia Al-Fat Brigade, but these ones, the Army of the Elite. Jaish al-Islam. I'm pretty sure they're sort of, we've heard them before. 1st Brigade Commando, that's the one I should have used. Men of War Brigade, the 23rd Division, the 9th Division, the 5th Regiment, the 5th Brigade. When you put these in alphabetical order, there's quite a few of them. So basically, the National Front for Liberation, October 4th, the NFL and the NSA declared that they had merged. Clashes between the groups erupted just a few hours after the declaration. Therefore, the NFL role within the SNA remains unclear, etc., etc. I've sort of included them, but it's interesting, So that's what there are, and historically, they would have been. Still got that game up. Historically, they would have been, and it's quite difficult to find these things. Let's have a look in the Syrian Civil War. Going back a while, but there they are. There, look. There they are. Free Syrian Army. So that's who they are. They've just been rebranded. And there's the Kurds. And there's Turkey. So I'm not sure where this is. Northern Aleppo. So, yeah. So that's that really. So with regards to this, if you had these special... So that's what these are. So what you do with those is sort of up to you. I did use FSA units originally, but then I made these ones and I gave them these rather peculiar colours because I wanted to look completely different to anything else that I've used. You run out of strips. I could, do anything really, but they are actually individually named. So this one, AOE, is Army of Elite, SFBF, the 5th Regiment. You can see it if you look closely. But I'm not sure. You could put something there to block the road to Raqqa because that's key. We've got Depression 2 landing there, but that would stop, these units just piling out of Raqqa, and that would cut that line. But because of the scale of the board, it's not really big enough because they just go round. But what else might you want to do? You might want to sort of land here, but this river's quite crossable almost anywhere. you might want to take that out because it's a border crossing with Iraq. So you might want to take both of these places, both of these border crossings out. So I'm just doing this for general reference because I think, if you were to sort of think, well, what is the Turkish strategy and what are they trying to achieve? Well, I don't know, because that's not really going to serve any point in this game. But from a roleplay perspective, you think, well, they might do things like that. But they might want to you might want to play it as a gamer. So you might sort of think, well, we haven't moved these units, we haven't moved these units, we haven't moved these units. So let's put them there. But we'll probably take these units anyway. You might want to put them under here somewhere, or you might want to plonk them both there so that you can get this massive combined arms on that stack there. So from a gaming, but the thing is we can't land and fire, so that's irrelevant. So you might want to put them, instead of putting them next to units or places where they can get fired on, they didn't get hit, but they did. You might want to put them there in the preparation of moving in and being the anvil against that hammer. See, we could do that. Or we could use them as special forces to take out their artillery positions. So we've got artillery there, but they don't actually have any other artillery. Or you might want to say, well, we're going to actually use them to take out Manjib. And that would probably be, the most gamey thing to do. They got hit going in there. That's because they're adjacent. Shouldn't really do them adjacent. They got hit doing that as well. So they'll be on 2. They'll be on 3. But we've now got a complete surround there. And we could bring these units all in now. Ah, he's gone into a zone of control. That was stupid. Should have moved him there. Like that. So we now got this, and when these special forces come in, we could take out Manjib. But that's sort of a gamey thing, and I'm not sure whether they're trying to take out Manjib, because they could have done that before. They got Durabulus. But, this is why the scale is not that brilliant, because you sort of think, well, what is the situation with Manjib? And these are sorts of things that I quite sort of enjoy looking into. You're sort of thinking, well, no one's sort of saying, this and that. A lot of people are just focusing on the grand political things. The Turks are not going to put on their Twitter account, the rationale for what they're doing or what they're trying to achieve. But I think this whole sort of movement was sort of pretty much on the cards. But these things tend to always be on the cards. The Turks have always been apparently building up for something or other in Idlib or along here, and saying they're building up didn't necessarily mean they were doing it, but they're not. Thinking, well, I don't even know whether there's anything on Wikipedia yet, but there'll be a Wikipedia article about it, and that's why sometimes it's quite easier to do these things, in 6 months' time when the Wikipedia article's been written up and it's all been sort of solidified as to what was happening and where it happened and things like that. But I was thinking the other day, actually, I know this game isn't sort of, a perfect simulation or model, but some of these things are actually getting quite good, simulations, and I tend not to like them because they're not games. But I was thinking along the lines of when I was reading my books on the Yom Kippur War, and the sort of level of detail that I like. I like the books that say, well, this element, these regiments were here and these companies were here, and then, they pulled in, they took out Abiad, and they moved in for Tel Abiad, and then they moved around Ras Alin, as the first stage, and the second stage, then they did this, and people were wondering whether they were going to go for Raqqa, and they weren't, and then they were, and then they weren't, and then, surprisingly enough, they did, or they took out Manjib. you know, but what I was getting to is some of these games, some of these things could be, modelled with some of this modern gaming software that they do, where it's three-dimensional at a certain scale, in which you could see things actually as they happened. And I find that interesting, not from a, I think you've got to always be aware of, the humanistic points of it and the terribleness of war. But you've got to throw that out the window at some point and just say, well, we can't be constantly referring to that. So what I was thinking was, if you could apply that technology to, say, Waterloo, and then you could apply when Blucher crossed this river and when Napoleon sort of set up his defence and when, the Duke of Orange or whatever it was, or the British moved up the road to Quatre Bras or whatever, actually have a serious model of what happened. Now, Waterloo is a famous battle and probably has been done in one form or another, even if it was a cartoon. I mean, I know they've made films out of it that were fairly realistic, but, and I know there are YouTube channels that actually have representations of what's happened, especially with older historic battles. But with something like this, I think, there's never really going to be the interest in modelling this or finding out what's happened, but that's exactly the level that I'm interested in, in actually sort of just looking at how these things pan out, not even really even knowing why. I'm quite oblivious to all the political machinations that go on outside. I mean, this whole operation could stop if, tensions between Turkey and the US become too much, and it's not something that's modelled in this. I get the feeling that Turkey probably want to make as much ground as they can before something happens, and other things that are on the cards, if they were really being truly aggressive, the United Nations would step in. And a lot of what happens is they do things before the United Nations or Western powers can actually react, but obviously they run the risk of being involved and accused of war crimes. In this, I think they have a just cause in the sense that they're deliberately saying that they're going to create this buffer zone, and to go beyond that would probably be pushing their what's that word when you've got a justus casus belli, to see what happened. But I think if I've started building my magazine for these sorts of things, but it seemed to me that when I was going through the Yom Kippur War, that what would be completely fascinating would be an almost step-by-step guide into sort of what I might call military archaeology. And oh look, that's a road. It shouldn't be a road. It's got a road thing there. It should be track. Change that. But military archaeology, although there's plenty of books on the Yom Kippur War, for example, as well, I'm looking at the moment, I've also got the 6 Day War, and those are going to be my 2 projects at the moment, I think, if I can ever get around to having any spare time. But if you could look at them, so there's books, they talk about things happening, but it's quite vague. The artillery came in and the barrage happened for 30 minutes, and then some planes went through strafing this, and the Israeli tanks were sort of like caught off guard, and then all the Saga missile units went across and dug themselves in, and etc. etc. It's all very sort of descriptive and very nice, but it doesn't actually tell you what units were where. And I find it quite fascinating to sort of think, well, how would you how would you sort of determine who was where? For some wars and things, there's just no accounting. I mean, I get into this quite a lot, really, in my videos. It's always from a slightly different tack. But in the Vietnam War and the Korean War, they actually had dedicated historians. Now, these are historian units in the US Army they were dedicated. There are like 3 or 4 of them based in the HQs, and it was their role to document and account for where every unit was at any given time, so that they can then historically write it up like a report. Now, when you're dealing with something like the Nigerian Civil War, or the Boko Haram insurgency in Nigeria, or the Sudan Civil War, Well, maybe not that because I just made that one up. But some of these lesser known affairs. For example, the Ukrainian conflict. I feel like I've been neglecting that, but nothing ever happens. But the thing is, there's probably not a step-by-step account. There's just absolutely no interest in anyone documenting or recording the history of that. And to some extent, I think that this is the same with this sort of operation. Now, I think Wikipedia is sort of like providing a really bizarre interface for that requirement, because it is documenting a hell of a lot. I mean, if you just look at some of the UN operations in northern Niger, it details everything that happens, almost, all the significant events chronologically. You could almost build a model up on that, but there's still no sort of definition of what units were where. And a lot of it's because it's secret, and because it's secret, it's probably, only recorded to the extent that it needs to be known, and it will never be written down in some sort of history book. And I think there's definitely a huge movement against actually anything that involves war that doesn't sort of have the absolute humanistic side at its forefront, which I find frustrating because they have absolutely no interest in that. And this is one of the reasons I kind of like this, because it's the level of interest. It's a part of our cultural right, in the sense that people have played war games for years. People had an interest in war. If you would give people two newspapers from 1987, because I can remember that year distinctly, reading about the sort of the situation in Venezuela or Guatemala or Peru, basically Central America. There seemed to be a lot of fighting going on back then. There were interesting stories, and you sort of, even just the words, sort of, today sort of, the government launched an airstrike on this particular region, taking out certain, rebel units, followed up by ground strikes. It all sounded very impressive, and it sort of struck me as quite interesting. But if the story was about, today the government, carried out this action and 5,000 people were displaced, and they went along to particular refugee camp in such a place, and they were all hungry, and it just gets so dreary. No one cares, but obviously it's terrible. Some of the things that cause me the most concern are when people don't have water. I find that really sort of, food obviously, but the very fundamentals of human needs. Water is like, is critical because it takes a lot of effort. You can quite often get food one way or another. You can forage, and you could probably eat bark and leaves, but water is sort of like one of these things that, even if you can get to a river, it's not necessarily going to be potable. And it's not just that, but these are sorts of things that I consider to be sort of, really, more devastating than the human plight. I think there should be a lot of effort into providing, I don't want to just say focus on water like I'm an idiot. But, I think, there's a lot of effort going through that port in Yemen. I can remember these places, Al Hudaydah or something, port. And all these grain mountains going mouldy, and trying to get this food and the water supplies through to, the people and their cholera epidemics. That's the truth, and we all understand that. But, I think going back to what I was referring to, when you just read it in a newspaper, they have substance and interest, and it doesn't matter whereabouts in the world they are. And I think, I've thought about it sort of fairly constantly for a while now, because I do this blog, and that substance is part and parcel of the appeal, because you're talking about these strange and almost exotic locations, the jungles of Vietnam, the deserts of the Middle East, this sort of, well, there aren't too many other places, but you've obviously got the very European landscape of Ukraine, and also the Croatia, Yugoslavia sort of situation. But you start reading these places and you start picking up the names and things like that, and it all has a sort of a sense of appeal. And I think that we have a right to, in the extent that we have a right to read newspapers, to sort of think about and consider these things. And I think there's a massive drowning out of that level of consideration just for political purposes. And this is almost abstract in the completely opposite direction. And we're just looking purely at the mechanical effects of the ground war, of the tanks rolling through with their squeaky wheels and men shouting weird things and taking cover as sort of like bombs land nearby, and press reporters in their stupid hats, hide behind walls and stick their cameras over and get all the latest footage and stuff like that. I think there's a drama there and an intensity that's sort of, I don't know. I mean, unless they ban the news, that you can say, oh, that looks interesting. What's that? You say, oh, well, they've just been crossing the border and they're trying to take out Tel Abyad. It's oh, right, okay, well, where's that? That sounds interesting, etc., etc. So I just sort of dawdling there, really. But this is obviously an active and live situation, and I think that it's sort of just as everything goes, it sort of raises lots of thorny issues which I don't normally cover, which I have sort of probably accidentally covered in the same way that you accidentally tread in dog crap. Not something I necessarily wanted to do in this video. Not that I'm trying to insult anyone, but it's sort of it's sort of interesting to sort of consider those things. But so essentially we've got these these things down here. So we've got these special forces that can sort of go in the back lines, and I put them in there because I do think the Turks have them. They definitely used them in Iraq before, and I think that these special forces are things that sort of they've not been using in Syrian civil war, and the Syrians don't seem to be doing that, and I don't understand why, because you would have thought that all you need to do is put some special forces behind enemy lines to cut off supplies and support them. I mean, I was talking about this in an earlier video, and after the video, what came to mind was Bin Fin Phu, or whatever it was, in Indonesia, the early Vietnam, French invasion of India, China, where they put in Bin Fen Mu Bi Fen. I can never remember these things. But the whole idea was they would put this massive French presence on the middle of a major supply line for the Viet Cong, or whatever it was, with combined with massive superior armaments that they would resupply by air. And what could go wrong? But essentially, you could do that on a smaller scale, and you could put in some special force units right there, and you could heavily protect them with air power, so anything that moves around them would be blown up, and you could cut this road off. And what could go wrong with that? And it's basically the essence of mobile warfare and of that kind of thing, what was the Vietnam, basically invented. And so I think it's interesting to sort of think, well, what could you do with these, these units? And I'm pretty sure the Turks are doing something like that, etc., etc. So anyway, I got to finish. Sorry if I just dawdled in this video, but that's how it goes sometimes. I will get on with the other video though on that other game that I've been playing at some point, and I'll speak to you later. Cheerio.